So today we're going to talk about Canadian Prepper and the Green Beret. It's his most recent video as of the date I'm making this one. So what I want to do is do some lessons learned, observations, thoughts and ramblings, and comments on that video so that we can use it as a teaching moment. Now, it's an interesting video. A lot of it I don't agree with, and we'll get into that. Some of it, a few parts, I do agree with. One thing I did find very useful is the discussion of psychological impacts of combat, types of combat, whether you're attacking, being attacked, surprise attack, and also if you add on to that the psychological aspects of just survival itself, loss of a spouse, loss of children, things that are happening, how you can cope with them. And I would really like to see Canadian Prepper, since he's a counselor, do an in-depth series on that. That would be an interesting video. Now, for a lot of people, one real good example of the impacts of psychological effects and traumas on people in a survival situation can be found in the Encyclopedia of Survival. It was by the CMIC group in Canada made that, and only volume 1 was published, and it has a table, and I'll show you an excerpt from that, and it gives you numerical ratings for different psychological traumas, events, life events. And that way you can kind of get an idea of the impact in the degradation of the ability of people to survive based on mental traumas. So we're going to show you a quick excerpt from the Encyclopedia of Survival. You should go on to use, bookmark it, and find this. Chapter 1 is psychological survival. And what they do is they have an example chart here of different life events. And they have a scoring system. If you read the article, you can learn about the scoring system, and they have points. And if you have multiple incidences, multiple activities during SHTF, you can add these numbers up, and it gives you a relative effect on a human. So for instance, valued at 100 is death of a spouse, change in residence is 20, change in work conditions and work hours is 20. So these give you kind of an index of what the psychological effect of some of these changes are. So get you a copy of this book, and it has a tremendous amount of useful information. Now, part of the video I do disagree with is some of the discussion and methodology of how to survive and defend your homestead, talked about by the Green Beret and Canadian Prepper. And in that, I would like to point out several things. He talks about using booby traps as a defense in depth, or a faraway defense of his homestead. So from a indiscriminate standpoint, if you have unattended booby traps, they're indiscriminate, and they do two things. If you don't have an overwatch and they're not command detonated, you're going to have unintended casualties, whether they're animal or human. And that's something that the people around you are not going to let go of. They're going to retaliate. So for instance, if my nephew or niece's 8 or 10-year-old wanders into your booby trap, do you think I should let that go, or should there be a response? Now, in normal times, booby trapping as a legal definition falls into an action known as man trapping, which is highly illegal in all states. I find it interesting that there's no specific prohibition of cannibalism, believe it or not, but there is for man trapping. So Man-trapping activities are all totally illegal in all states in the United States. Now, I'm not going to consult Canadian law. If you live in Canada, you need to consult Canadian law to see what you can and can't do. The other aspect of booby traps is there's three kinds from a legal standpoint. In the United States, the first kind is an explosive device that falls within the legal definition of a destructive device. That requires a $200 tax stamp, prior approval by ATF for possession, manufacture, usage, etc. And even though possession can be legal after a tax stamp has been successfully gotten, using it against an individual is not legal because it's man-trapping. The second kind uses a propellant, a projectile, falls under the category of a firearm. Now, the specific kind of firearm is an NFA item. It's an any other weapon because it is a disguised weapon. So a lot of booby traps that don't have enough explosives or propellant to be classified as destructive device, they're any other weapon because they're a disguised weapon. Now, the third type is fabricated from natural materials and doesn't have any explosives, propellant, primers, anything like that. So it can be nail strips, it can be deadfalls, and it is totally illegal to manufacture those with the intent to kill or harm people. So you can be charged with conspiracy even if you didn't kill anybody. That's something I would really like to point out. So in a post-disaster situation, if law and order is brought back, you will be charged with multiple felonies for using these devices. And that's something people really need to consider. Now, the biggest issue that I see with different types of booby traps is the fact that they're a target indicator. A target indicator can alert people that there's something valuable in the area. If you are not watching these devices 24/7, one way to handle a bomb maker is to put a booby trap in or around their booby trap or on the transpo routes they use to access their booby traps. So for instance, if you have a team that is booby trap and laying mines in roads, the people around, the military around, will do ambushes in the time windows when people are planning those devices. And if you think about it, I talked about this extensively in the Urban Sniping series. Target indicators are what gets you killed. So if, for instance, if you're sniping and you're not hiding your weapon as you move in and out of the target area, then that makes you a prime target. And that's how a lot of snipers are found and killed. So just keep in mind, most booby trap manufacturers are known as bomb makers. When I got my destructive device license, there was only 13 other businesses in the United States that was licensed to make material like we're discussing. So the legal ramifications are very severe. And what that means is you cannot assemble, test, and practice with devices whatsoever without running deep into felonies unless you have destructive device license. Now, on top of that, some of these things you have to have an explosive license to get the ingredients. So that would add another tier of licensing. And these are considerations that are not discussed in that video. And you really need to think long and hard about this, because I can tell you the target indicators you give off, the legal ramifications, and the unintended consequences of using those type of devices unattended will get you into more harm than they will get you out of. Share your thoughts. We'll see you on the next video.